Start with Mitch.
My name is Ron Mitch, Aldi Nero, Mellors Joker, Mitch Flacko, Bastard to God, normally shortened to Mitch Flacko. I play in Hagar, The Womb and Anarchist Wood, both punk rock bands, and I spent 20 years as a roadie working with bands like The Slits, The Pop Roots, The Creatures, Magazine, and so on.
My name is Melodie Holliday. I've been involved in sort of performance art and music since the late 70s via poetry and trying to tackle sort of racist street violence. So I was also part of AFA, and I've set up things like Shakti, which was the first LGBTQT, as it was called then, I suppose, South Asian campaigning group in the 80s, and the first sort of South Asian Turkish HIV/AIDS charity. So, music, I work with Circuit, Bendon, and do stuff with a woman called Jessica. I also work with a bass player of a pop group, actually. So we've got a duo called Conspiracy of Pleasure, and I sort of fuck around with sitars and breaking them and repositioning them and things like that.
Hello. My name is Debbie Smith. I play in a band called Ye Nuns, who are the world's foremost all-female tribute group to the Monks, who you may not have heard of, but Google them, they're fun. I also play guitar in a couple of other bands which are resting at the moment. The London Dirt Hole Company, which is a noisy, punky sort of group, and the Blood Tub Orchestra, who do songs from the music hall in a punk style. I used to play in indie bands in the 90s that you may have heard of depending on your age. Echobelly, and before that Curve. I've played in bands since I was 14, I'm 50 now, so that's me.
Hi, I'm Melodie Holliday. I am in the band Art Trip and the Static, I can't even say it. Art Trip and the Static Sound. I am a PhD student. My PhD is on punk, just put that in there. I am also a teacher at the University of the Arts London and an artist, and I'm really happy to be here today.
And this is the panel was Melodie's idea as well.
Let's have to do the work. I'm going to take credit for it. That's what I do.
And I forgot to introduce myself as well. So I'm Steph, and I'm part of the Decolonise Fest collective. So we might as well kick off then. So I thought like a good question to start off with would be, how did you first discover punk, or how did you first discover kind of alternative music? Who wants to start?
Well, it's Bill Grundy and the Sex Pistols for me. It's being old enough to have been around at the time. It's heard that. I was in a children's home at the time, and the house mother rushed out to buy the Sex Pistols single, and also bought the Damned and the Strangler singles as well, which we played over and over and over again.
I think I'm probably the oldest. Always proud actually. Mine was sort of the Sex Pistols, but I learned to hate them really quickly. It was in my first year of high school, and a kid who was already a punk, we were only about 11, 12, put on the record, and you just heard this screech and shouting, and I knew that was something to follow, but it came through poetry really, and I was already involved with sort of radical poets, and my mum was an educationalist and a feminist, so she was already working with people like Professor Stuart Hall, John LaRose, and things like the Bogle Overture bookshop, the Huntleys that set up, and I was also involved in the Anti-Nazi League, so there was all this sort of backdrop, because I was brought to Harrow from Hackney, and it was really racist, and the NF had posters everywhere, and so I started to look for people who were a bit like me, who came from sort of a radical background, and started to find them, so yeah, we started making punk music really at school.
I also saw the Sex Pistols on Bill Grundy's Today Show. I was, I don't know, when was that, 1976? Yeah. So I was 8, and me and my dad were watching it. We thought it was absolutely hilarious because they were swearing. And I went upstairs and dug out my nappy pin and wore it on my blazer to school the next day. So I didn't actually buy any records at the time. That waited until about 1978 or so, when I was doing a paper round, so that I could actually buy records and stuff. One morning, I was doing a paper round and I'd gone round the block, and it had been raining, and I went round for my second run, and there was a cassette tape in the gutter, and it was absolutely bone dry, so someone must have just dropped it. So this is 6 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And it was an Ampex C60. I still have it somewhere. And it was, someone had just taped loads of John Peel radio, sessions or bits of sessions. So I heard things like the Au Pairs, Susie and the Banshees, the Damned, stuff like that. So that was my real entry into punk. So I started listening to John Peel because that was extremely important, and I sort of just started buying records that I'd heard and liked then.
I'm going to just kind of repeat a little bit, because it was that seminal moment on the Bill Grundy show, which it seems we all know and love, but there was also a lady in that who was standing by Susie Sue, and her name's just gone, but there's a mixed race.
I never thought not a mixed race girl.
No, the mixed race. I'm sorry, I've just gone blank. But yeah, she's there, Simone Thomas, that's who it is. Yeah, and she was really important to me because I kind of got my role models that represented who I was as a black person. So she was fundamentally important. Also, I was at art college, and this amazing person came walking up the street one day, and they had white bondage trousers on. And I thought, who's that? And it turned out they were going to be my tutor. Anyway, we kind of got together, not in that way, because I was a lot younger and he wasn't very interested in that kind of thing. But we got together, and he kind of took me under his wing, and he gave me like mixtapes, and the Slits was on there, and Typical Girls for me was that song that really captured my imagination, because for me I was never going to be traditionally beautiful or normal, so I was working it all out. So when I heard that song, I kind of thought, okay, there's a place for people like me who are not going to fit the mainstream. Sorry, did I go on?
No. You don't want too much. But that's really interesting, and it's really important that you all mentioned kind of Bill Grundy, because I guess we kind of forget how much that kind of changed the landscape. Could you describe kind of what that moment was like, and kind of what England was like in the 70s, really, that made that so important?
Well, England was very grey. I mean, I know things are bad now, but we had the winter of discontent. There was the Nazis sort of getting 15% of the vote, going around. Policemen used to shout at me, "Oi, nigger!" This is policemen in full uniform. People were, the right-wing military and MI5 conspiring to sort of even think about doing coups and stuff. It was a very strange time, really grey. And then suddenly there was this really weird thing on the telly. It's these people swearing, these people just looking as if they didn't give a fuck. And it's sort of not what you were used to at all. It was rather funny and liberating. In fact, there are still things to laugh about.
I'm just going to contradict the Bill Grundy thing, because I thought they were a bunch of idiots actually when I watched it, because I already knew people who were already punks, and I hated Susie Sue wearing fucking swastika. And around West Harrow, when we were in Southall and stuff, and a lot of us who were getting together, we were Misty and Roots set up in Southall. 76 was the Southall riots. Post that, SMG, Southall Monish Group, set up, so be involved with that. A bit later on, Southall Black Sisters, so the really positive stuff. So some of the people that I worked with, who looked at using science fiction, and also looking at, say, plays from Japan, India, whatever, and activists, because the Pakistani people writers were based in Hounslow South, and these were radical people. who'd come out of all sorts of difficulties and dictatorships from other places. So we had an internationalist dance. So I'm going to be slightly controversial, because it's like my mate Rav, who is a punk, and he considered the idea of Star Trek, like the Bill Grundy thing, and the Susie Sue stuff with the swastika, couldn't handle the Bromley crew, talked to some of the people. I mean, they were racist shit, some of them. So we took from reggae locally as well, and in Southall there was the South Community Centre, and there was a sort of reggae club, and there were sound systems as well already, so it was very, I have a different trajectory to all of this in a way of radicalism and punk, and then, not that there were many black punks, but the idea, it was the attitude. So I have a slightly different, take on it.
I was 8, I just thought it was fun. Literally, that was it. I obviously I was aware of racism, because you could not be black and living in 70s England and not know about it. I mean, Melodie mentioned Simone being on it, and that was, I mean, this was a time when people would run around and knock on people's doors going, "Black man on telly, black man on telly," because you wouldn't see any people of colour on television at all, and if you did, they were always being taken the piss out of. There were sitcoms which were basically, they were just based around racism, literally, and that you were supposed to find that funny, and that was the only way we were represented, but it was the only way we were represented, so, you know, if one of those programmes came on, you would watch it just to see black people. It was a heavy time, really. But back to Bill Grundy, it was really good to see that there was a black person who was different to everyone else that you see, because, you know, you just see your cousins and people at school and your aunties, your mum and dad, and everyone was just sort of normal, and it was just a burst of colour, and that they wore colourful, weird clothing, which was really not since the mod days had anyone sort of peacocked like that, and it was just tremendously exciting to a little preteen like me. That's it.
Well, you know, looking back at the 70s for me, I sort of say I think of school and I think of a soundtrack, and if I was going to have a soundtrack to being at school, it would be a chorus of Jungle Bunnies, Go Back to Where You Come From. It was, that's what I remember at school, you know, and I did have to go home to my mum and say, "Mum, I'm being called a Jungle Bunny and told to go back home. You know, what am I going to do?" And she went, "Call them names back." And I went, "Like what?" But before that, I had to puzzle out why people might not like me, and I think the realisation that people might not like me because of my skin colour was really hard to take as a young kid. So when I saw, I mean, I had many seminal moments, but the Bill Grundy thing was funny to me. But I saw the Sex Pistols first on TV, and John Lydon, to me, as a kid, because I'm 49 this year, he just looked like a really naughty boy to me. I think when you're young, sometimes you see people a bit older, and you just think, I can see that with my own kids, that people kind of take to them, little kids take to them over me, because I'm a lot older. And so that's what I thought about the Sex Pistols, really. And the important thing for me about punk was being able to channel my anger. You know, I had an enormous amount of anger that I didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't know how to deal with racism at all. And seeing these young white people who were angry and sort of questioning what empire is and imperialism was really important to me. And also, I have to say, I wasn't living in London at the time. I was one of a small black community in a place called Rugby. So there weren't many black people there. So I had to find a way of survival, and punk got me through.
That's a really good point. This is all right.
As though Steph hasn't got enough mics.
So there's kind of two strands to go through from there, like kind of like using punk as a way to kind of realise your identity, but also kind of recognising that there were a lot of elements to punk that were quite racist, and kind of like the Nazi symbols, and whether they kind of actually recognised that was, well, they knew that it was racist, but they kind of pretended it was a design. So kind of to start off, like, you know, kind of, did you ever think about kind of those elements of punk being racist, or kind of, or did you ever experience any kind of like, you know, kind of experiences like that when you got into the punk scene, or was it an issue for you?
As I mentioned before, I have worked with Susie Sue, and I did talk to her about the swastika thing. It's like what she said publicly, also she said to me, is they did it to shock. They didn't really know the history about it. Concentration camps, all that, weren't taught to about. They weren't told about that in school and things. And like, they knew about the war. They knew that sort of like this is what the Germans wore, and they knew that their parents had fought in that war. And it was like a way for them to shock it. When she realised a bit thing, I think even by sort of like early '77, Susie apologised for wearing a swastika, saying it's like she's not a racist, never had been a racist, and she apologised for it and sort of like stopped wearing it. That's one of the things. Sorry, can you back to the question? My brain's gone.
Yeah, just like if, so kind of on that, and also if you've ever kind of, if you're worried about kind of like getting involved with the punk scene, or if you experience racism in the punk scene.
It's at the time, early on in sort of like '77, I did not experience the racism in the punk scene, which is one of the reasons I was really attracted to it. I also hung around with skinheads a lot of the time. Again, it's skinheads around that time knew where they come from. It's a black culture. And so I felt really safe amongst the punk and skinhead scene because of that reason. Punks, they were like, fuck everyone, and sort of like, you're not normal, great, we're not normal, we accept you. The skinheads know they were from that culture, so it was safe to be around them. So to me, the punk and skinhead culture at the time was a safe environment for me.
I think it was different being Asian. I think that made a big difference. And I think also thinking back to that was something that we used to talk about as well, of you almost had like some great role models in music, or the idea of blackness and the way it was articulated in Britain in a way had more kudos than being Asian. And remember we had the 1972 Enoch Powell's speech, before then the 72, the exodus from Uganda, that whole, and people were actually uniting regardless of, you know, they didn't want Pakis here. That was real. And in '76 when the Grunwick strike happened, I mean, to me that was quite seminal, and seeing such a mix of people, thousands of people, and even though the media stuff was a bit patronising, it was really quite amazing. It felt like you felt like unionists and stuff were coming together, young people were coming together, it seemed. But in terms of the music scene, personally, I found it problematic and it depended, because I see it as two waves of punk in a way. I think the latter part, the stuff sort of more in the 80s, I think in a way was far more political, although when I was young and a teenager, we were already involved in things like against boots, because they were tested on animals, we were relating that to environment stuff. But I did find it difficult as an Asian woman, and when I shaved my head for the first time, it was difficult, whereas I think Asian communities were a bit more tolerant, plus I'm big. So, you know, there's that public presence and stuff, and the sort of clothes I wore, but I found it difficult, yeah, sometimes. People, whether it was punks or skinheads, people would call me a Paki, and it was just easy. I was called it recently, actually, by an old punk, funnily enough, at a gig I was doing. You know, but it was in part, it wasn't calling me a Paki, it was talking about Pakis. So that's very interesting. When I was in Montreal and did a gig, I was really shocked at meeting punks who were so bloody racist. It was really shocking in the mid-80s as well. And I never thought that would be... I'm not saying all punks were like that, because they weren't, but yeah. The 121 Centre as well, the Anarchist Centre, I thought that was... The on Relton Road, you know, I thought that was a great space to come to. On Relton Road, and that was... When did that set up? In the 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I thought early 80s, yeah. or the Black Ink Bookshop, all these satellite places.
So were they all kind of spaces for punks or?
121 was an anarchy centre, so there were lots of. I mean, punks maybe not in terms of the whole garb and everything, but in terms of.
Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Ugandan refugees, Pakistanis, Irish, Jamaican, Trinidadian, African, everyone was everywhere. So there was no, you couldn't be racist because you would be beaten up. So I was quite lucky in that I wasn't targeted in any way like that. But if you two are talking mostly about the first wave of punk, and I was far too young to be involved in that scene. My scene was the second sort of generation with Crass and Poison Girls and anarcho-punks.
Is that in the 80s then?
Yeah. And of course, because they were anarcho-punks, and they were basically hippies who wore black, really, and played thrash music. But you know, everyone was a lot more politically aware, and everyone knew that racism was a bad thing, working to eradicate all sorts of wrongness, basically, in general society, but also, I guess, in the first wave of punk as well. So yeah, I too found it a safe space, because being black, and I also knew I was gay at that point, and I'm not going to get into it, but I was also suffering from sexual abuse around the time, so I knew I was different, and I had stuff to be angry about, yeah, so it enabled me to channel my anger and try and, you know, find myself and also solidify my otherness, my identity as other, and try and work around what exactly I was. I knew I wasn't exactly like everybody else, but this was a good place to start.
So it's a weird time. I guess I'm a bit like Debbie in terms of age. And I think on the one hand, I was experimenting around with clothing, cutting off my hair and things like that. So there was that kind of identity that you had in common with other people in the small town in which I lived, that kind of put you in this little group. At the same time, I knew that racism existed there and was prevalent. But I felt, you know, using street smarts, that hanging around with a group of marginalised, angry people was going to be somehow better than hanging around with a group of people that didn't feel oppressed at all. So, you know, to that extent, I kind of thought, I'm going to get it anyway. You know, I literally can't change my colour. So if I still get it within this punk community, it's not great. But it's at least, you know, I can argue it out and say, well, how do you feel when people, you know, say stuff to you? So in that sense, I navigated it. It wasn't by any means perfect, but like Debbie said, it was a place for me to deal with my anger, to deal with feeling like I didn't fit in and actually not giving a shit about it, to deal with the fact that I was questioning gender, my sexuality, my role as a woman, my position as a black person, just everything. You know what it's like when you're a teenager. So questioning, I needed to be in a space, and punk offered me that space to question, and still does, you know.
Brilliant. I think, and that's kind of like a lot of things that a lot of people of colour in punk are kind of dealing with now, and still kind of trying to find our identity through this music. I mean, I think everyone kind of like talked about that a bit, but I kind of like want to go a bit more into that and kind of just say, like, kind of how did you express your identity through your music? Did you kind of, or through kind of like the bands that you liked, or was there any particular way that you felt like that needed to be expressed?
I mean, it's the cliche, the Carnaby Street punk. You had a leather jacket and you put your band's name, all the band's names on the back. You cut your hair, you dyed your hair. You wore bondage trousers, kilts, You know, you carved out your little niche, yeah, you just got on with it really. For me, the most important thing, the most important thing that punk did for me was it made me want to play music. Not just made me want to play, but made me realise that I could play. I was an avid watcher of Top of the Pops, as was everybody. And I remember watching in 1973 Susie Quattro doing Devil Break Drive, and I thought that's a good job. But you know, they were pop stars on television. You know, you never thought that you could actually do that. And then punk came along and, you know, sniffing glue, this is one chord, this is another chord, this is another one, now go and form a band. Wicked. So, you know, that's why I've been able to, you know, play music pretty much my entire life, because punk instilled the can-do and don't give a fuck what it actually sounds like, just express yourself attitude. So, yeah.
I'll stand back to me. I think musically, I think I'm with Debbie. I said I was going to pass loads of things to you. You know, just giving you the freedom to feel that you can pick up a guitar and play it. I mean, when I was younger, the way that I looked in this small town, people made kind of judgments on it. There was a small black community, and you know, that was seen, it was the kind of community in which girls who went out with boys would be called slags, that kind of thing. So it was kind of, I don't know if it's different times then now, but dressing as I did was quite not perceived as being a good black girl. Okay, so there were battles to fight that maybe people don't understand now, or maybe those are still ongoing, but they were things that you kind of had to deal with, and that don't sound like a big deal, but you could get called to slag for just talking to boys and stopping out past 10 o'clock. It was that sort of thing. So for me, a lot of the things were navigating, going to gigs with all these white guys and just being like the only black girl or whatever, and you know, finding out about music on my own with a few helpers along the way, because nobody else in my family liked punk. My brother and sister liked soul and funk. My mum liked reggae, so I had lots of that beautiful music in my life, but I didn't have punk. And the people that, the white people that I did know, some of them didn't really like punk. So it was very much an experience of being on my own and discovering, which is why I feel very, a great deal for people who are on that road of discovery today with nobody else to kind of guide them, if you like.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that is that the whole thing about being having the courage to pick up guitar, especially people like Viv Albertine, you know, seeing women playing instruments, you never saw that ever. So that was really, you know, really empowering. And also, yeah, punk appealed, just as Melodie says, your mum had her music, your dad had his music, your friends had their music, you wanted your music, you know? So, especially in the black community, punk was a joke. So, you know, you just wanted to, you know, have your own thing and make them see that it's really important, man, you know?
I think I have to do the two ways again in those things, because I think, again, I'll emphasise, because I just thought punk was just too visibly white, so to me it was about sort of fucking up your own saris, so we paint, you know, I paint my own and wear, like, I really started to wear steel toe cap DMs, really big ones, because I later on joined AFA and, I don't know, anti-fascist action, what that was about and stuff. So to me it was not just about my own anger, I was sexually abused as well. So I had a lot of issues. On one hand I had this sort of family that were considered to be very liberal, divorced, whatever. My mum was sort of feminist, involved with Aaron Piss years ago, and SBS. All of this. On the other hand, there was this really sinister side to it all. So I was literally in Harrow trying to find people like me, and I was lucky. Later on Nation Records, Aki Nawaza was in Southern Death Card when I met him from the Moonlight in West Hampstead, because they were one of the few pubs that let underage people in, and I began being tall and looking at it. And a lot of us, some of us did, some of us already looked androgynous, and people were always already shagging each other, and that was because of punk as well, actually, that sexual liberation. But it was an internationalist perspective to it, and I was just fortunate, really, that my mum took me around as many places, so I was meeting lots of people, but I think the main emphasis for me was to find like-minded people and to do our own thing, even beyond the music. So we had a band called the Morossis, we had a zine called Token Black, where we interviewed people like Linton Chris Johnson, all sorts of people, you know, involved. I met Kathy Acker, performed on the same stage. So there was a sort of supportive environment I met, and I should mention the names of the Asian and the Afro-Caribbean people that we worked with, and by that time there was Southall Youth Movement, there were bands, so a place called Cranford Community School, so it's not even like in inner London, you know, this is on the outskirts, so there's a scene which hasn't been documented. So I've got two sides as always, and being Asian again, so I wanted something that spoke to me, because there were the slits and everything, but really they had no association with us lot in Southall. They did have an association with black communities. You know, the word black for us as well at that time was political because it was all encompassing. It changed later. So I'd say Afro-Caribbean communities, but really there's no connection until maybe Aki came along.
What I liked about punk is around 78 there is places like this happening all over sort of like England, and these were places where people could go and experiment. You may not have liked a lot of what was going on, but they were sort of like, you encouraged people encouraged you. It may have been sort of like not just experimenting with music, experimenting with your clothes, experimenting with art, experimenting with drugs, sexuality, all those things. It gave you space, a space where you weren't really hyper-criticised. People may go, don't like it, or like, are you sure about that? But it wasn't like, you can't do that. That was one of the things you didn't hear that much can't, which is what I liked about punk that gave me room to experiment.
Oh, that's cool. And so I guess like we've kind of talked about kind of how kind of our own communities reacted to it. But is that kind of why you were drawn to punk? Was it rebellious, or was it just kind of, it just happened to be that music kind of took you all?
So I mentioned before, I was brought up in a children's home. So up until the age of 12, so in 1976, up to 1976, I lived in a place called Elstree, a town of about 33,000 people at the time, and with 5 black kids there in a couple of children's homes around. So at the time, as I said, like a policeman would call me nigger as I'm walking down the street. I spent a lot of time hitting people, including policemen, for calling me nigger. But that's like kind of, that's what I did. I moved to London in 77. It's like, oh great, it's a load more black people around, I don't have this problem. But the school I went to had a very big nasty presence. So it was like, nigger, time to start again. As you said, your mum said hit them. It's like, doesn't matter if you're outnumbered, and first few times they get bored of being hit more than, well, they're going to hit you anyway, so you may as well carry on and hit them until they get bored of it. And after about a couple of years, that stopped. But during 77, when punk did actually get a bit big, there's quite a few of the other black kids in school professed to like music. There's none of them really dressed in a way, but a lot of them were borrowing my singles to take home to tape.
Well, I just want to say something about the idea of the freak. With me, punk, sort of before punk was George Clinton. So because there was this house where the older brothers and sisters, friends of mine, used to play music, people used to get together. So that was where a lot of stuff happened, or looking at pictures of Sun Ra. So the idea of the outsider, the freak, or even like reading Jeannet when you're a teenager at that time, you know, the angst of things or whatever, outsiders. Yeah, so I think that felt for me that punk was like a manifestation in this country that locally you could get involved with. But I come back to it, it's about the organisation and the politics again. By the way, Penny Rimbaud, one of my gigs, did say to me that I'd lost my culture, meaning I was losing my Asian culture. So that fucked up my sycophancy about crass, although I have gone to the commune. Yeah. Oh, you'll be surprised at things I can tell you. You'll be really surprised. Maybe he's gone all hippie, really hippie. I don't know. It's just like gone. I know they were hippies, but I've had all sorts of nonsense. So that's what I'm saying. Politics is really important. Like communities, it's so important for us to organise and be with other communities that have got punk. And I mean, the Ruts from Hayes. That was, they were really important. People like John Cooper Clarke, and coming back to people like Professor Stuart Hall as well. I mean, his writing or whatever. Anyway, there are many like that.
That's a good point, that kind of like punk has existed within POC communities. Even if it's not kind of like the Sex Pistols, it's existed in kind of like an idea, like I was saying, the politics. Was that kind of like something that you were thinking about when you're kind of like when you're in punk, when people are telling you you've lost your culture, you've lost your community? It's like actually that community is.
2 years ago, about a year and a half ago.
Oh yeah. I mean, people tell, kind of assume that I'm in a soul band instead of a funk band, and it is kind of like that idea that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Do you ever carry that idea of you with that kind of like? There have been a lot of people that look like me that have done things that are punk, but maybe not play the guitar. That's not a proper question.
You just made me think of something that's just started to really irritate me quite recently. As you can see, I have a shaved head. I can see my partner looking at me. I think you know what I'm going to say. Right, so I have a shaved head, and recently people have been coming up and saying, am I Skunk and Nancy? Oh, don't. I get that all the time. Wait for it now. So Skunk and Nancy is a band, fool. And Skin is the singer. And there are more than one black woman with shaved heads. It's just like, how hard can it be? So it just triggered this memory and something that is just constantly happening. It's just like, what? Apparently I walked into the 100 Club the other day and somebody heard, one of my family, heard someone say, is that Skunk and Nancy? And then somebody else came up to me and said it. You get it as well?
I get it all the time. The irony is, Skin's real name is Deborah. Yeah. And she's got her birthday's 2 days before me, so it's just like, that's just weird. But before that, back in the two-tone times, I used to be called Pauline Black. It's like, there can only be one. There can only be one. It's
You're lucky I get asked if I'm Mira Sayal.
Well, again, it's there can only be one famous woman of colour. There is only one, It's why is that? Why aren't we allowed to have more than one role model?
But it used to be back in the day that if you said something, people go, but she's not horrible. She's like, that's a compliment, and it's kind of like,
no, it's not. I tell you what, you look a bit like Margaret Thatcher, actually. Take it as a compliment. Seriously. Seriously. What was the question?
Just using this time to get everything off that chair.
But no, that is a good point about kind of like those kind of microaggressions, I guess they're called, of like, you say it's like a little thing, but it's actually quite a big thing that happens to you all the time, and obviously we don't all look alike. So how do you deal with that? Or does it still happen to you when you're kind of like going around at gigs?
It happens, but you just say no. Like Melodie said, you say no. Do I look like a band of 4 people? No, that sort of thing. You have to brush it off. But it's a minor annoyance, really. It's nothing like actual racism or actual sexism or homophobia or anything. It's not anything that is going to kill you, basically. And you just brush it off and you save your energies for the fights that need to be fought, really. But yeah, it's you just cope.
I can do the next question. So I want to start off with kind of like asking you when you all kind of got started in bands or when you started going to gigs, and if there was like a big time difference between when you got into music or when you kind of got proactive about things and got organising.
There was never any other black person at a punk gig that I went to that wasn't Mitch.
Was Mitch always there?
Yeah, no, Mitch was at all the gigs, and I was at some of the gigs, and that was it. Seriously, that was it.
Yeah.
So, you knew you were walking into a blindingly tundra-like white landscape, but it was better than the other ones you had a choice of, really. Yeah, but I mean, there was no sense of exclusion, but there was no overt invitation or, help or anything, because obviously being black, white people don't understand your journey to this place. And whilst they can be nice and supportive and all that, they don't really understand what it's taken you to put on those clothes and, walk down the street and being called freaky deaky by all the other black kids in the neighbourhood and all that sort of stuff. They don't really understand. But it never really bothered me all that much, to tell you the truth. It wasn't, I mean, I still to this day, I count the black people at any gig I go to. It's like, yeah, there's another one, all right.
That's one.
Yeah, seriously. We're still very underrepresented in traditionally white, although it's not black, rock and roll is black, obviously, but traditionally white musical genres, we're still very underrepresented on stage and in the audience. So I'm not quite sure how we go about changing that, except to go to more gigs and get your friends to go to more gigs and form your own bands and do things like this.
So how about you two? What was it like?
Being slightly older than Debbie, so I was going to gigs a few. In the sort of like 77, when I sort of first started going regularly to gigs, lots of times you'd have reggae bands playing with quite a few punk bands. So this would be like how I saw Aswad First Time, Misty, Still Pulse. It'd be because they would be supporting punk rock bands. So there'd be quite a few people of colour there as well because of that. But when I was going to just punk gigs, like probably all of us, it's like you'd go in, you'd have a look and sort of like, is it going to be safe for me here now? Especially more around 78 when the Oi thing started and when I realised skinheads weren't all my friends. Like first time I got beaten up by skinheads was at a UB40 gig. I'd gone along and sort of like with a couple of skinheads with a friend of mine to watch UB40, saw a bunch of skinheads going down the middle, thought I'll go and join them. And suddenly like, oi nigga, what are you doing here? Does not compute, does not compute. Skinheads, reggae band, they don't like black people. Okay, right, sorry. But yeah, there were sort of like few black punks rounds, not a lot. It's mainly a white male music form, rock music, generally speaking. If I go off to a heavy metal gig, I don't even bother looking for other black people because I know there won't be any around. As I go to a punk gig, I do look and say, a lot of the time Debbie will be there. But so otherwise, there isn't. That may change. It's I used to work with children, and one time I was playing Yeah, Fats. I was playing Fats Domino, and one of the kids came up to me and asked me why I was playing this white music all the time. So yeah, it's a matter of like people need to do music education. We need to do music education and tell people that sort of like rock and roll is a black thing. Remember what they said about Elvis?
I was just trying to think, when was my first gig? I don't actually know. It might have been the Anti-Nazi League, one of their festivals, maybe Rock Against Racism in 76, 77 possibly, but my mum would have taken me to smaller things, maybe folk stuff or something, folk punk, whatever. I'm really not too sure. I think it was probably her own, maybe something in the South or maybe the Ruts. I don't know, but I remember an early Adam and the Ants gig, and the Skinheads started Seek Highland, and they didn't stop playing, and it was a couple of punks who actually attacked my friends, older sisters, brothers, friends and stuff. These blokes actually just ended up piling on these Skinheads, and then it all just went crazy. But they carried on playing. They didn't stop. They should have actually stopped and chucked them out. I think later on they did, because similar things had happened. But I think later on when I think the gigs that I did in the late 70s, early 80s. Oh, I've also got to mention John Stevens. Anybody know about John Stevens? A guy in 78 started up part of the free improv scene, but was also interested in setting up community music places so that young people, all people could learn in a free environment. So that was sort of more influenced by people like John Cage. So quite early on in 79, 80, we organised one of these sessions in Acton. There was a lot of bands in Ely and Acton as well. So we could smash up a piano, and that was really amazing to do. So I'm just thinking, oops, yeah. And I think gigs much later on, I found gigs in Paris really quite heavy, actually, in the 80s. I just thought there was a real again, no Asians, no black people. No black people, that's all we used to say in those days, no black people. And just that attitude, really, because I was with some French Moroccans, punks, and it was really heavy, like you thought you were going to get stabbed or something. It was different here. And I just think of the 80s, I think you've got, I'm just trying to think of bands like Birthday Party Theatre of Hate. I'd go to the early things, or the Moonlight, and then when they got big, I'd stop going. So, try not to be too much of a fan. So, yeah, you were always the only ones. I mean, there was the one thing that used to happen, though. You see a black person, what are you doing here? It was like, really smile. I mean, you do that on the street in those days as well, really. It was also on the street, yeah. Sort of looks like you, but it's a bit weird.
So did it mean a lot to you guys to see another person at a gig, or?
I was gonna.
Oh yeah,
Now I was going to talk about being from a small town. I would. It was kind of weird. Rugby was, because you would have. It's a tiny place, so you'd have one venue would have like a mod night, a reggae night, and a soul and funk night. So I'd be dressed like a punk, riptides and all this sort of stuff, and I'd sort of stay during the mod night, stay when the funk had gone. So I'd go out to different things dressed as I was. So in that way, it was kind of a weird place because everything happened in one spot. So there was a kind of merging of cultures and identities and what have you, but still very strange all the same. But I was going to say that actually it has made me quite hard over the years, being like the only person who would look a certain way. So I have kind of survived on my own, if you like, and it has made me, I kind of don't, it's really difficult. I think maybe a few years ago I've kind of relaxed, but I realised that I was kind of operating like this lone survivor of things, which I think sometimes isolation can make you kind of just forge ahead. Do you see what I'm saying? So I've learned to reach out to people, but I think when you're on your own sometimes it's just like, right, I'm going to get on with this, I'm going to go. Because if I'd waited for people to go with me, my best friend was black and into soul and funk, and I'd say to her, I'd go to like funk gigs dressed the way I was dressed, and I'd go, will you come to a punk gig with me? And she'll go, no, I hate it. So I would just have to go take myself off sometimes, which made me actually a bit spiky personality, because I'd be like, I'm just fucking going anyway, by myself, I don't give a shit. So if I did see another black person, I'd just think, we're all on our fucking own, let's just get on with it. So I was a bit tough until, you know, coming together like this, if I'd had this, I'd be more sociable.
I'm glad we have this. But yeah, that's a very good point of kind of like seeing other people and kind of like that affecting the way that you're interacting in the scene. I mean, I know you're kind of like, there wasn't a lot of people then. There isn't loads of people now, but there is kind of a lot more outlets for people. Do you think like representation has changed, or you know, could get better in any particular way?
I feel a bit sorry for kids today because they don't have subcultures. There's just one Nike shoed fucking homogenous thing, you know. It's just there doesn't seem to be a way to seek something that is different and it's your own. I know that a lot of young people do that, but the fact that we don't have subcultures, they seem to stop sometime in the 90s. I don't consider Britpop to be a subculture. You know, I think it's a bit sad really, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's very important for young people to go out and find something that is themselves and to actually, you know, dress this way and listen to this and talk about the other and have their own identity and then have that filter through until they are older and they really know who they are. I mean, apart from my shaved head, you'd never know I was a punk. Look at me, you know. But I'm still punk in here, but I've decided that I'm going to look like them so they will never know. I look like you, but I am not you, and I never will be you. Do you know what I mean? I've decided that punk is inside rather than outside, you know, apart from the hair. Because I can't think of what else to do with it after 30 years. But, what was the other question again? Sorry. I can't remember what the question was. Representation. Yeah, representation, yeah. Well, it depends. Because there are no subcultures, there's representations, but it's all in slivers. There's little tiny slivers, and you can take little bits here and little bits there these days, which I think is a healthy thing. But representation, I suppose, has got better, but at the same time it hasn't. I mean, maybe in numbers, but the fractions remain the same. We're still the same. We're still a minority, and it doesn't matter if there are 10 black people at a punk gig rather than one. It's still a tiny fraction. That hasn't changed. So the representation really is down to the internet, really, because anyone can see and find anything now. You know, just by going onto YouTube or finding a blog or something like that. So that's really good, but don't let that fool you and think that there is more representation, because there isn't. It's just, it's the same as it ever was. You can just find it easier.
I think sort of like that it's like Debbie, I feel sorry for the children of today for slightly different reasons, because I think there is less spaces for experimenting. When we were younger, we could go off to pubs, we could go and actually see bands play very, very easily. As like 13-year-old, I didn't have a problem getting in to see U2 at the Moonlight Club or what have you. Whereas today, the kids can't do that, they need to have ID. When I was 16, I dropped out of school, but if I decided to go to college, my main thing would be there to sort of like meet people, take drugs and drink, which was, you did. The kids these days, they have to stay in school until they're 18, and when they go off to college, they're expected to do things like work, not to find themselves. With spaces, I've said how there used to be places like this quite around all over the country, like this DIY space. You go off to the smaller towns now, places like Evesham, which used to have a place like this in the early 80s. You're not going to get there. Even places, sort of like big places like Edinburgh, won't have sort of like a space where people can experiment, people can go and see themselves. And I think there's been a growing homogenisation of everything. So maybe like, oh, things look a bit more representative, but the subcultures are disappearing, which I think is a bad thing. And yeah, percentages, as Debbie said, are staying the same. And hopefully places like this will carry on, and hopefully be people around like you experimenting and let your friends know it's okay to experiment and have a laugh.
I think I probably agree with all of that. I just got a different perspective with the idea that, you know, when you're outsider or in a subculture, it always shifts finally to the mainstream. So I think some of that politics, experimentation has actually shifted into the mainstream as well. And if you think internationally, with some of the music that's coming out of cities in South Africa, or the way they're making music, or the way people are collectively getting together, or somebody like Mitch Flacko goes to Johannesburg and makes that connection directly, and some of the work they do, or clandestino festivals, or if you look at some of the other European festivals and who they're bringing in, and that's not just punk, because I mean, it depends on what you consider punk music, because I also on the noise scene and the free improv and stuff, so, and it does cross over, because like Debbie said, it's in there, and there's a certain attitude, like, you get a bunch of things together and you can make music, and it's what you do with it and your attitude and the politics behind it as well. I think there's a lot more of that, and I'm thinking of maker spaces. Maybe things are changing, shifting from what we knew, but certainly what I worry about is the infrastructure not being there. I mean, even though you might have slagged off sort of civic society and local authorities, housing, all that basic stuff, I think, with that infrastructure collapsing and that vision actually going of what sort of Britain, let alone the world we want to live in, from this country's point of view, is really difficult. But I think I'm really quite optimistic in some ways. From the relationship that, say, Asia's making directly with Africa, and countries, different countries within those continents going directly, you know, rather than going via Europe as well. I think maybe we're going to be the losers, maybe, in all of it. I don't know. I mean, you know, I work with people in Delhi who are working directly with people in Dakar. You know, they're not coming via France or Britain. They don't give a shit about the diaspora, really, in a way, either. So I think that's very interesting. It's not just the internet. They're trying to make physical spaces happen.
I think that I'd have to agree that perhaps I don't know everything that's going on at the moment, but I think the conditions are ripe for action and mobilisation. If I think of the 70s, there was so much shit happening around. It was very depressing to be a person of colour during that time. And I think with the current political state of things, that people are just going to get pissed off. They're going to realise their power. So I do hope that there will be action. You were talking about representation though, and I kind of picked up. Yeah, so that's the hope, that there will be a shift, and that people will think that they are powerful and that they can change things. I do worry about the infrastructure. I do think that I do worry about being the oldest person to be living in central London. When I work as a lecturer in a university, and a lot of my students are moving outside London and commuting in. So I had hoped to grow old and sort of witness the creativity here from those younger than me. But it seems a lot of people are moving out, and I worry about that, and I wanted to be sort of sitting on a park bench and going, wow, look at them. You know, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do have a lot of hope for the future that some radical action is going to take place.
Did you guys ever interact or collaborate with people of colour who were from America? That's what I wanted to know during the time. Because now I think, I don't know, I don't want to talk for everyone, but I think maybe it's more open. And did you ever look to like America and say, oh, was America more diverse than the UK now as it is now?
So when I was growing up, there weren't computers or mobile phones. So I had to arrange to meet somebody at Euston, come in from rugby, and they had to be there. So I'll just say that. I mean, in terms of what was happening, I only really had access to like newspapers, newspapers and 4 channels of TV, and so I was really bored and pissed off. And I couldn't really tell you what the rest of the world was doing, I watched the news obviously, but yeah, it was a different time for me, so I handed it over.
Sorry, what's the question? Has anyone did you collaborated with American people of colour?
Yeah.
No. Basically, no. American people of colour, they have a completely different. I mean, it's on the surface, it's kind of the same, but it's completely different. They have a completely different place they're coming from, a place they're going to. No, I've seen some. I mean, obviously Bad Brains were a big influence, but I've never met any of them. Death, I never even heard of them until I was in my 30s. No one had heard of them, The black punk scene and in America never really came over here until the internet age, really. No one knew anything about it except through if you were subscribed to zines that you get sent over. So no, that's never been an issue for me. So not that it was an issue, but I generally try and ignore America as much as possible anyway.
Again, it's sort of like my main thing with Americans being when I've been touring over there as a roadie, and sort of like I found Brooklyn at the time, which is about 20 years ago, to be about the second most racist place I've been to, Australia being the first. But I think I experienced more racism in Brooklyn than I did in sort of, who knows, sort of down in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I went off to a punk rock club in Washington DC a few times in the 80s. This would have been sort of like, again, the place would have been vast majority white people, and this is a city which, if I think correctly, is about 90% black.
Something like that. Yeah.
Is that Black Cat?
No,
The 920.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, no collaboration by me.
Individuals, but sort of in the 90s really. But it wasn't. Well, we had a sort of spoof thrash metal punk black band called the Dead Jalebbies. And so these people started to take us seriously, and it was a bit like Spinal Tap. And we were sort of like the judges of the people who judge communities, people who pretend to be representatives of black communities and stuff like that. And anybody we were just thought were idiots or, in authority or whatever, and we'd do sort of slide projectors in those days as well, so slides and do these sort of performances. So just thinking, there probably were people from America, so we were doing gigs at the Underworld as well. I'm trying to think of who. So probably individuals who probably, and then in the 90s there was the Caminas, I think came over. Takwa from Mohammed Knights, yeah, that sort of sci-fi thing, and then people thought it was serious. I think there was somebody from there. I did sort of collaborate in Delhi a couple of years ago with Heems out of what band is he in? I can't
Sweatshop
remember the
Boys.
Grizz.
Sweatshop Boys.
There you go. He was really off his head, and yeah, he thought he'd do some noise with the speakers. So he was on his knees in front of me, and I was making him lick my boots while he did this because he was So that was sort of collaboration. No, but I think more seriously, there was a collaboration with our theatre stuff and performance stuff, which made it bigger when some of the Worcester group came over. Quite a important political street theatre, but also did music and performance art, as well as supported punk bands at their space in New York. And I think that was really important it was more a collaboration around doing like workshops and things on how to organise. And that was really important to find out. We should have bought all those spaces. That was really interesting, how to resist this regeneration thing. And that was really interesting, learning from them about how they've managed to survive and still are around. Yeah, that was, to me, that was a really political and important thing. So yeah.
So we have 5 minutes, so one more question. What were you going to do? Yeah. Who wants it?
Thanks so much, it's been really, really interesting. And I guess really thank you to Debbie and Paloma, because I grew up in a vacuum of like the South Wales valleys and was always the only brown person in every room, but went to see Echobelly when I was at school and saw Debbie on stage, and that kind of the cover of Diva that you and Paminda were on was something that I saw before I'd met anyone, and to see these two kind of like brown women in these kind of crazy dresses looking a little bit like on the cover really like meant, I mean, I know there may be lots of other stories around those things, but they really made it much more comfortable for someone who was growing up in a vacuum to kind of feel like, okay, I'm not on my own, and maybe one day I'll meet some other people that are in this scene. But my question is really more about kind of the queer scene and kind of what it meant to be a kind of person of colour, a black person, a punk operating in London at a time when then you're getting into the 80s, where there's things like Section 28 and all of those kinds of bits of activism that were happening. If you could talk a little bit about maybe, did it feel like there was a kind of subculture of a sort of gang of people within kind of queer activism, or within kind of political activism that was also punk, or like how did that, sort of how did it configure itself, that Venn diagram of kind of being of colour, being maybe in a queer scene and also in a kind of political space? Sorry, tiny question.
So, what, being a Quinty Bock? Well, yeah, I came out 1984, got into the gay scene, and again, that was overwhelmingly white for lesbians. There were obviously black lesbians, but again, it divided because black lesbians tended to stay with them in their own communities and have their own spaces and not really mix. I'm not sure if it came from the white side or the black side, but that's just how it was. And also, musically, it was much more the soul, reggae and funk sounds that they were listening to, which I liked, but it didn't fire me up like punk and alternative music did. So I, again, found myself in the middle of a load of white people. But I did form or join a band called Mouth Almighty, the drinking lesbians band. And they were all Scottish, a pair of identical twins and another woman called Debbie. And we actually did go on a tour of Europe, publicising the imminent passing of Section 28. So that would have been about 1987, I think. So although our songs weren't necessarily political, in fact they weren't political at all, they were all about love affairs going wrong, because that's what lesbians know. But we did actually go out into Europe and try and with people like Louise Wallwine, she was speaking, and there was a queer theatre group, male theatre group from Didsbury in Manchester, and there are other queer activists from all over Europe, from Finland, Germany, Estonia, places like that, and we all just went on this bus and went around, and it was really nice. It was really good, but yeah, just about queer musicians, there weren't any. I couldn't see any queer black musicians around me at all. So it was a bit like being the only one. But I was so used to that, straight, whatever. People have come up to me years later and said that seeing me doing my thing really helped them to just, you know, be who they wanted to be. So I did it.
I just trying to think of memories. I just wanted to mention that. Do you remember Sauder, Rochelle? Used to run it. The black lesbian Wild Core. That was in the 80s, wasn't it? Late 80s. But big. Was that the 90s? Where there used to be bands on and all sorts. Yeah, hundreds of black, bisexual, and lesbian women would come to Sauder. Anyway, that's another story. I was just wanted to mention Sauder because Sauder was there, and it was maybe more acoustic. Actually, Skin played there acoustically with, who was the guitarist as well. So they used to put these nights on Sauder, I think once a month. So there was that. And I think in the 80s though, with Section 28, I think we still had Hounds of Arts Co-op and stuff in them, and the Deadly Levies, and then we set up a new one called the Sycophantic Sponge Bunch, which was about the sycophancy around some of the sort of sycophancy around identity politics that we were getting around. Oh, what does it feel like to be Asian? Or what does it feel like to be an Asian bisexual woman? And we sort of like this. So we were having to deal with a lot of politics at that time. But at that time, I became a race equality officer. So just reminding people that a lot of the big cities at that time, there were lesbian and gay units in a local authority, and in Ealing, which had one of the biggest at that time from 84, it was before 84 actually, because that was the miners' strike in 84, so we were involved. We had a big lesbian and gay unit, a women's unit, a police unit, which would look and catalogue harassment, and we had one of the biggest race units in the country, in fact, with a lot of power. So we were putting on quite regular via poetry, so I didn't know musicians so much. But it was artists, but poetry, like people like Gabe Richards. There was a whole black queer poetry scene, and there was the Black Gay Men's Place in Brixton. There was people like Ajamu, a photographer, and there were musicians within it, maybe more acoustic. I can't remember properly. It's a long time ago, but I've got some documentation on it. So my approach was from that, and then I met this guy called Shivananda Khan, so we set up Shakti in 87. So we had a lot of music in there as well, and bands, but I suppose, because I was out bisexual woman as such, or I say a white gay drag queen trapped in a celibate Asian, you know, it was always playing with everything. So I think with Section 28, that was a big fight, because that was attacking already where like things like Inner London Education Authority had already made advances into schools to talk about equalities generally. So people were already doing things in schools and trying to change attitudes towards, I suppose it would have been called lesbian gay communities really at that time, you know. And plus Spare Rib was out, you know, had been published. So there was this move also with feminist movements, and I think Section 28 was a real blow. Yeah. You know, it was a real blow, because already at that time we were also dealing with the British Penal Code in India, with Section 377. We'd started that fight in the diaspora to try and repeal that. So it was all fronts, but at that time also, you know, the nuns with Jarman's nuns and the bands and the singers. That's Dulgers, yeah. Somebody I worked with in Ealing was one of them. So we were organising and doing odd things like we do a benefit for somebody or another, and just do improvised stuff really. So that's the thing. Oh, we also did benefits. So by that time also people like there were Hustlers who were this hip hop crew, and there were a few hip hop crews actually. I'm trying to remember all their names. I can't remember. Sort of punk hip hop. So people were getting together to do benefits as well. Yeah.
I think we're going to have to stop there, but that was amazing. And so thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much for inviting us all here today. It's brilliant. Thank you.
We're here for about an hour. We're to start at 5, but there should be some food outside there by Tipsy Luxury. Thanks.